Alright, we can get started. I'm very aware that the next stage is at 5 o'clock, so make sure we finish before then. Hope we've got a little bit of energy for our final session. Thank you for hanging around. My name is Dr. Anthea Clark. I'm from La Trobe University in Melbourne. It's also home of the Matildas now, our new building, which I don't get to visit until after the World Cup, so I have to delay that process. With me, I have Alicia Edge from Compete Performance. She's an advanced sports dietitian, previously working at the AIS, now CEO of tech startup company Compete Performance. She's also the Matildas dietitian, so thank you for coming and taking time out to be able to chat with us. We have James Barkle in the middle. He's a lecturer in health and physical education here at the University of Sydney. Former professional rugby union player, wrong sport, but that's okay. With main areas of interest around, from a research perspective, around performance analysis, coach pedagogy, and skill acquisition. Next to him, we have Nico Furlan, who is the program lead, athletic performance program lead of company Joint Lead, specializing in the return to sport following knee injury. So we're going to definitely have some conversations with you around the ACL. He has an S&C background. He's also been involved in rowing programs as well as the Chinese Olympic Committee and various rugby programs. Finally, on our right, we have Billy Mason, who is a lecturer in sport and exercise science at the University of Canberra. Also a PhD candidate at the moment, currently looking at exercise interventions and game day preparation strategies to improve performance. So thank you all for coming here today. Alicia, I might start with you. So I know a little bit about your organization of Compete Performance, and in that you talk about this idea of trying to shift the nutrition support delivery model. So can you explain to us what you mean by that and what you do at Compete Performance?
So I am an unintentional innovator. I'm very risk averse as a human, but my husband is not. And when I left the AIS to start a family, it became really clear that the way that we service, the way that we supported athletes was a bit broken on both ends. So from the dietitian side, I was at home, I was looking to return to the workplace, but returning to professional sport for me just wasn't going to fit how daycare works or how life works as a new mum. And on the athlete side, I was realizing that I wasn't able to access or I guess change the behavior of an athlete, how I felt was best utilized in where I'm at in nutrition. So with food, I think, and also probably in a lot of sports and sports sciences, we do love and we do adore science. We do, really absorb ourselves in all the newest research and the numbers. And I think we can lose sight of a lot of that, particularly when the food space, food and nutrition is a science, but eating is a behavior. And that's the biggest key that we kept losing. When I was sitting one-on-one with an athlete in front of me, I was then going, okay, see you later. We've had this chat. Best of luck. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. That doesn't work when it comes to behavior change. Behavior change has a lot of barriers and challenges along the way. And I didn't see the progress that I would like to have been seeing with my athletes as much as I love my job. And when I found myself at home, I was talking to a lot of athletes. I didn't have access. I was at the AIS previous to that. I just thought, let's try a different way. This is in 2016 now. Why do I have to be in front of someone to be able to change their way of thinking, to help them adapt their environment? Let's try something online. And so we started to play around in 2016. We took a really big risk. I remember when we first decided to do that, my husband sat down with me and he's like, you're not going to get paid for at least 2 years if we do this. I was like, that's true. It was absolutely true. And I'm still, we're still not paying ourselves very much as we're just continually investing in our company. And the biggest thing, I guess, for us is that we did go online, I guess, with support before COVID. It kind of forced the hand a little bit. And so we were ahead. But I think the biggest thing for us is that we've been able to have a decentralized servicing model that fits the need of the client, and also how they interact in conversation with this age group has been a really fit for purpose piece that we didn't necessarily anticipate or plan. I would like to say we planned it, but a lot of it was just continually asking questions, continually adapting. And I think the really big thing about being in a tech startup is you have to change quick, you have to do a lot of listening, and you're able to change quite quickly because we are a small team. And that's been a really big benefit as well. So when we're talking changing nutrition support, it's really questioning, just because we've always done it doesn't need to be the way we always do it. And I really wanted to take that, or you only go and see a dietitian if you're overweight or you need to change your weight, or if you're injured. That's not the narrative of where we're best placed as a profession. And by taking us out of the clinic room and out of that, oh, she's got to see the dietitian, that narrative doesn't exist anymore. You're talking to a dietitian because you want the best out of your body, but more than that, you want to feel your best and perform at your best. And it's, much more around the behavior of food, setting up the environment and your relationship with food and body than it is about grams or prescription. And we're very rarely doing that prescription side.
Brilliant, thank you. Nico, I might go to you next. It's been a massive conversation around the World Cup around how many ACL injuries are happening. I know you focus mainly in the rehab process of it, but give us a general idea about ACL injuries and women, why they happen how do we reduce them, and is there a way that we can improve this narrative around women being at risk of ACL injuries and for women and be careful and take care of them?
Well, first thing first, there is definitely two main components to the discussion. Of course, you've got your biological factors, and then you have your external factors. So in biology, of course, you can't really control. And to a degree, it's nice to know that there is research looking at specific factors, like for example, the way your knees make, so like intercondylar notch or tibial plateau slope. I could throw a lot of names of boards here, but ultimately, unfortunately, we can't really change that. We can't have an effect on that. So it is true there are certain factors that predispose women to have a slightly higher injury risk. Another one is the structure of the hips as well. But there's also plenty of factors that are controllable. They can be influenced, and I think it's just like pick something that you can control and can influence, and you're going to reap the rewards. And for me, just starting with the low-hanging fruits is access to good coaching, because I believe there was a study done. They interviewed all the female players. It was 2 World Cups ago in France, I believe, and they asked them about their perception on injury risk. They asked them about their perception on what needs to be done, and I believe one of the answers as part of those questions was 50% of the female participating in the World Cup at that stage did not have access to a strength conditioning coach at their team, at their club. Now, of course, I'm a strength and conditioning coach, so I'm a bit biased, and I will be focusing on that. If you go to an orthopedic surgeon, which I'm lucky to collaborate on a daily basis, they'll probably talk to you about tibial slope and all this stuff. If you talk to a physio, they might have a different answer. It's all about what kind of stakeholders are involved, but ultimately it's about bringing everyone together, which is in a way what we're trying to do where I work at Landmark Orthopedics and Joinlink, and it's basically just making sure that we act where we can act and what we see, as we see fit, to develop things like good practices, good coaching, access to good equipment, access to, particularly in terms of resistance training, and strength training. I think we're still far behind not just in women's soccer, but across all the sports, all the team sports, and in women's sports, which is so far behind. And also you have the cultural aspect where it is only now changes where you see more clubs, or at least more schools providing access to a gym to young girls. Because of course, we have like an incredible amount of ACL and injury rates in general at the knee for females. They're going up. The projection, I believe there's Dr. Manier at that trial, I believe is in Melbourne. He's doing some research on knee injuries prediction, and females, particularly 14 to 19, are in the injury rate for that cohort is going up, and is going up quite substantially. So the goal for us as practitioners, as coaches, will be to provide as much solutions to these girls and to this woman later on, so that they can move better, they can be more resilient without worrying too much about the biological factor, if you ask me, because they're there. So I don't think we have a higher number of females injured their ACL, but not all females injure their ACL. So to a degree, it's like, okay, it's good to be aware of that, but where do we shift the perception? Where do we shift what we do? And the time is, I believe, now or yesterday. So we've got to get going with that.
Yeah, perfect. I think I've also seen some research that's come out recently that women who have done their ACL are more likely to not return to sport as well. And I think that comes down to the resourcing and access to the physios and the S&C coaches after that. So a good environment for avoiding and reducing that risk of getting the injury in the first place is absolutely important. Billy, I'll go to you then. So from your research, from your applied experience working with some of those female athletes, how can we develop that S&C component for these female athletes? And perhaps from your experience, do you spot or recognize any differences between coaching males and females?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and it comes back to a few of the discussions earlier around resourcing, we touched on it then as well, is a lot of the time females not at the top level, obviously, but they can be seen as an afterthought, and the resources that trickle over from the men's programs go then down into the female program. And as Nico said, I think the big thing we need to do is get that early intervention to help set the platform around consistency and good training habits, nutrition for these female athletes to develop as they go through that period of 14 to 19, whatever it might be. Looking and comparing males and females, one thing I do notice is I find that females are really invested in the process. So they really want to know and make sure they're doing things right, which is a good thing. So they want to know numbers around GPS from a performance standpoint, exercise, and they want to be doing it right, which I think is a good thing to have. I think we as practitioners then need to just be mindful around what information we share in terms of what's important and what's the message we want to try to get across, in terms of trying to improve their performance and make good habits, but not get so caught up in some of the details that don't matter initially. I know we're talking earlier about social media and the impact that can have. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some stage, particularly around the nutrition side of things. But what happens is, people come in and they see these videos and think that, talking about Sam Kerr does this, and Sam, can I do it? A lot of the time they don't realize it's a long path to get to that point. Another thing I do like in regards to the female side of things, and particularly being under-resourced, is we really need to lean on each other and working in a multidisciplinary team, particularly, as it goes down in the levels, you see people wear a number of hats. So a physio might also run the S&C, might also run water and things like that. So I think having a good team around them and pulling in people that can actually contribute and help long term is really beneficial. So
I've definitely spoken to some S&C coaches and field coaches who almost enjoy working with female athletes more than the men, because they actually listen to them and they want to get that information from them. So I think if coaches can get over the barrier of thinking that working with female athletes is a subpar thing, I think most who work with female athletes really enjoy the experience. So promoting that is a nice thing to do. James, I'll go to you. Flipping the focus from the athlete to the coach side of things then. do you think our coaches are equipped with the sufficient skills and knowledge to work with our female athletes?
I think the general answer is going to be no, but I think that is changing a lot at the moment. Thinking about sports, a variety of sports, not just football, but I think in general, when you go and do a coaching or coach education course, a lot of it is based on technical and tactical aspects of the sport. And for a lot of these sports that are traditionally male dominated, whether it be football, rugby, AFL, a lot of those technical and tactical aspects are taken from the men's game. And I've got a colleague over here who's doing a lot of statistics on football. And if we look at football as a sport, straight away you can see differences in the way the game is played. In the men's game, you'll have a lot more shots from further out. In the women's game, they've got to be a lot more technically proficient, and they're working closer. And I've been really impressed with a lot of the goals that they're scoring closer in within the penalty box and stuff like that. But moving away from the technical and tactical aspects on its own, I think there's a lot of other things that we need to consider. And I think you've just covered, the nutritional aspects aren't really discussed that much in coach education programs. The strength and conditioning aspects probably aren't really dealt with in coach education, coach development programs. And then we've also got to identify that there are going to be variations. So I'm sure Alicia will talk about this in a moment, but women have probably got a lot more, especially at the elite level. Athletes like Sam Kerr, if I think of high sport rugby, Charlotte Castic, for example, in rugby sevens, very, very big social media profiles, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on them to look a certain way. So when it comes to nutrition, is it going to be nutrition for performance, or are they thinking for themselves in terms of themselves? Is it going to be more nutrition for the way I advertise myself on social media? I think the same is with mental health. Women, and I think the panel with all the 5 football players earlier on identified this, often have to deal with more travel. They deal with potentially more family issues. They're obviously, a lot of them aren't full-time professional athletes, so they might work as well. So they're doing these 6 to 7 or 8 hour days of work. They've got to get training. I think we're talking about 5:30 in the morning. Then they've got training or something after work. And so they're managing so much. And I think that's not really discussed in coach development programs. And for a lot of males, we know that it's they're probably not aware of that. And those sorts of programs should be providing that information and, I guess, differentiating coaching a male program versus a female program, just identifying some of those differences and I guess preparing or letting coaches know. And it's not just male coaches, I think it's female coaches as well that need to be aware. And I'm going to give you a little plug quickly because I know she's too modest to say, but Ansie's also a really good coaching female athlete program that's available through La Trobe. So and I think at the moment you've got if we look at like coaches in general in women's sport, I think we're looking at roughly around 70% are males still at this stage. And I know you're all talking about trying to increase the female participation, but in terms of the total participants of your course, it's like 20% males, I think.
Very low.
So you've got this massive population of male coaches, but are they the ones that should be doing the course? Probably, they should be. So, but they're not. So it's just, I guess, disappointing.
A pet project of mine is trying to improve all of our coach education courses so that it doesn't become an optional course that they do and that everyone has to learn some of this female athlete consideration. So if anyone works in coach education, I'd love to have a chat. Okay, so I will put some focus on myself. One of the research areas that research areas that I'm interested in is around our female athlete menstrual cycle, particularly around the coach athlete interactions around that, as well as education and monitoring practices. So, if anyone remembers from the last World Cup 4 years ago, US women win, and one of those key news stories that come out of it is that they were tracking their cycle and that they contributed them tracking their cycle in part to their performance. So I want to get each of your perspectives as to where you think menstrual cycle tracking fits and thoughts around the process.
I'll go first. Okay, as a male, and I have coached a number of female teams at a fairly elite level. I would find it very hard to openly talk about or discuss the menstrual cycle, and I think we've got to sort of take away that bit of taboo that it's okay to talk about it. But I can also understand from the athlete's perspective, they might not feel comfortable talking about it with me, so there might be the opportunity to either bring somebody else in to have that conversation. Whether I'm gonna, I guess, whether we use that information to assist our program, but I think something that's, and I think Anthea, we had this discussion, that something that some coaches, or especially male coaches, might do is encourage their female athletes to have a journal. And you don't need to share it with the coach. It's something like completely personal to them. And all they're going to do within the journal while they're tracking their menstrual cycle is start to identify, a period of time where they might feel a little bit more lethargic, or they might feel like their energy is a little bit lower or their energy is higher. And then also, they're tracking their diet, and again, Alicia can probably build on this part. If they're tracking their diet, then they can also potentially say, look, at this time, in my cycle, I'm consuming more protein or something, so I'm actually feeling really good. Whereas last month I noticed that I was my protein intake was a little bit lower, and I sort of felt a little bit more lethargic this time. So what does that mean for me as an athlete at this time in my cycle? I'm probably better off having a little bit more protein. And again, that can be a really personal journey for the athlete, and they don't need to share it with the coach. It's just like the coach, I guess, providing some direction for the athletes to maybe consider some of those sorts of things. Yes.
Yeah, I think the direction in terms of athlete-driven awareness and curiosity is a really good one, and it does need to go down to consent as well in the athlete. I can only say not all athletes are comfortable in having their menstrual cycle discussed or shared, and also there's a lot that don't find it an issue. They don't have symptoms. They don't feel like it impacts their performance or how they show up on pitch or whatever it may be. And so I do think it needs to be approached, particularly where the research is at the moment, it needs to be approached on an individual basis. And that awareness and curiosity is a beautiful place to start, because that's where they can then start to notice, hey, I do feel this way, or it is impacting how I feel or how I recover, or my soreness or my fatigue. And that's when we can then support them on knowing who to reach out to and when to reach out. And that safe conversation. I think everyone in this room doesn't need to be the expert in menstrual cycle tracking or menstrual cycle interventions. It's that we all know who to go to and who to refer to, so that we have a supported player, but also a player that knows they're in a really safe environment in that way as well. So I think, yeah, if we've got players that are really well educated, they're aware of what's normal, what's not, they know when to reach out, then that's actually success in this space for where the research is at, in terms of intervention as well.
Well, I think education is definitely a key aspect of it for coaches. I have heard stories of unfortunate coaches prescribing oral contraceptive as an injury reduction strategy, which, I mean, do we need to make any comment about this? But so I think there was a recent review, like 5 million participants. They look at oral contraceptive and injury, at least it was on musculoskeletal injuries in across a range of sports, and the research says it's basically at the moment there's no clear influence of that. So I do think that education plays a very important part for coaches, and I will agree with that. Education should be mandatory in coaches' curricula, because there needs to be boundaries in what is said out to women and players, and there definitely needs to be at least a set of not rules, but I would say a set of recommendations for coaches to be able to confidently go and potentially discuss and manage this conversation. Now, in my previous work experience, I've worked in China in the pre-Tokyo period of time, and interesting perspective culturally, because I was managing particularly the women's lightweight as well, and a few other teams, but young females, very, very lean, oftentimes, unfortunately, due to bad dieting processes. We didn't have a nutritionist, so I was, as a physiologist and a coach, I was doing that because no one else could. Luckily, again, I had the ability to reach out to a friend of mine who's, she teaches nutrition at university. So I said, okay, where do we go from here? I had that support. And that reaching out is definitely was helpful. Now, interestingly enough, going back to the taboo, I think I've never had a problem discussing that. The athletes were really, really open to just tell me whenever they couldn't train, whenever they fell down because of that. We didn't have any specific training around the menstrual cycle. We just felt we didn't have enough justification to change the training schedule because of that. We'll just pull back on the day if it was needed. This is potentially a barrier because particularly in team sports, it's really hard to actually go and have an action and modify the schedule of a whole team for, in consideration of the variability of the 20 plus players, if that makes sense. Do we have a question? Are we responding to question now? Yeah,
sure.
No, I had a comment actually that I agree that the food education is essential. I've had a international female coach. I competed in bikini bodybuilding, and when your body fat is low, she actually asked me, "Oh, do you still have your cycle?" I said, "Yes." I'm surprised, but it was almost as if, like, if I had lost it, it was a badge of honor that that I was very lean and athletic in that way. So I think even from the female coach side and the male coach, there's definitely a need for that education.
Being female does not automatically mean that you've got any better knowledge in this space.
Right.
So I think to summarize my point of view, I believe there's definitely a lot of barriers around changing and adapting training, particularly team training. But the awareness and that conversation itself, it's definitely going to support your relationship with the players as a coach.
Firstly, I agree a lot with Alicia there around the individualization and having those conversations with people. But to just piggyback off your point, I think the conversation needs to be had around performance health and how they, from a health perspective, we're shifting away a little bit from some of the aesthetic stuff, not necessarily from bikini bodybuilding standpoint, but just more generally in society, and hopefully it doesn't go back. But a lot of the conversation, same thing around strength and conditioning and around nutrition. I think we really need to focus on health rather than the aesthetics side. From my personal, experience with tracking, we have the group I'm working with at the moment. We have a female physio and a female dietitian. So we do have wellness where they report different things in there, the players, and that goes through the physio. From my side as a strength and conditioning coach and on the field and in the gym, it's really about just having conversations with the athletes around symptoms, if there's anything we need to modify in that space. But coming off the back of all the comments here, I think logistically individualizing training for a team, not sure if that's the right answer at this stage. Some modifications can be made, but there's also other elements that need to be factored in around coaching, team cohesion and things like that. I definitely think it's an important space, and I would also give a thanks to Anthony. I've done her short course and some information there was really helpful. So
Thank you everyone for all of your comments there. They're all brilliant. I think for me, it's great being able to see in, print media, online, the conversation around menstrual cycle happening and the potential and the benefits of tracking. My biggest concern in this space is that teams start to track because they think it's an assumption that they should be tracking, and yet they have no data security, data safety set up in place. They have no referral system in place, and so you run the risk of having this issue where an athlete thinks they're in an environment where people are taking care of them and checking the data and doing the right stuff. But if there's no one actually actioning any of that information, it's a lot of onus on the athlete of inputting data and nothing's happening, even though they think someone's going to be looking out for them. So all of this nuanced discussion around menstrual cycle is really important, and I think needs to be had from lots of people in lots of areas, so that we're not just blindly rolling out menstrual cycle tracking and no one knows what they're doing in this space. I'll continue on that around the idea of social media and its and print media and its place in terms of athlete performance and changing practice. The thought is, or research shows, that it takes about 17 years to get from research to changing practice on the ground with individuals. So that's a really long time, and we don't want to wait that long, and women's sport needs to be a little bit faster so that we're not losing athletes or it's not bad environments for these individuals. So how do we accelerate this support? How do we pass this knowledge to the people that need it on the ground? Everyone.
Okay, yeah, so before we were talking about social media, I think that's since COVID, a lot of formal coach development stuff went online through webinars and through, Instagram. Now you've got coaches putting your thing, drills up, posting information. We were talking about academics probably could do a lot better job in this space reporting their research, but I guess they also need to make sure that they're making their research, I guess, a bit more accessible in terms of the way it's presented. So I don't know many coaches out there that understand p-values and what an ANOVA test is and all this sort of stuff. So I guess delivering the information in snippets and showing that it's supported by research, it's supported, it's got evidence to say it works, but then, I guess promoting that through that social media sort of network. I guess the problem that we have to deal with is there's a heap of people out there posting stuff on social media that are rogue practitioners that have no education in certain things. And we're using an example of strength and conditioning coaches that have 20 to 30,000 followers, even sometimes even more, and they're stacking massive amounts of weights on bars and lifting them and doing all this sort of stuff. And there are probably kids out there that are going and saying, "Oh, this is how I get strong, this is how I get fit," whatever it might be, and they're trying to copy that stuff. So we're just going to be really careful of that. And I think that's why, as academics or people that have, I guess, some skin in the game that understand it, we need to probably promote ourselves a little bit more. I know that John Norright, he does a lot of good stuff on LinkedIn and really sort of promotes himself in that space well and promotes his research and stuff like that. So I think if we can, one, promote our research a little bit more to the masses through that social media stuff, because it's just growing and growing and growing. And the other thing is, I think we need to try and change our language around how we present it, so that it is, I guess, accessible for practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, one of my passions personally, I am not an academic. I am not into research. My passion solely lies in translating the research to the environment and the people. That is where I love to work, and I appreciate all the research and all the academics, and I adore them. But my time is best spent, and I appreciate that that's not my forte in academia land. One thing that I think is a really big part that needs to happen is we need to swallow our pride when we're sharing results and findings from research. We need to simplify, and we need to really think and question, who am I actually talking to here? Who does this message actually need to get delivered to? And who needs to understand it? Because I think too often we're talking from academic to academic or specialist to specialist. And it means that that information isn't transcending down to actually who is on the ground with these people, with these players, who needs to understand it, who needs to get excited about it, and who needs to be curious about it. So we need to simplify, and we need to always question, you know what, I found out this incredible thing, this research has shown this incredible thing. How do I now translate that to practice? What does that person actually need to know? And how can I make it in a way that's really easy and exciting to absorb as information? And we need to embrace, you know, reels, TikTok, infographics, and it needs to be simple, it needs to be to the point, and we need to, in that way, swallow our pride from the detail and actually just get down to what do they need to know, what do I want them to take away from this? And it needs to be, you know, anything away from only 1 to 3 key findings. So that's probably where I think it needs to go. I don't know if the authors are the best people to do that all the time. But there needs to be some kind of, I don't know the answer to that, but yeah, it's a really tricky one, but I do feel like it needs to shift.
Academics are a little bit socially awkward.
Yeah, that's why I said it really nicely. Yeah.
Definitely agree on that. I think also being smart and leveraging on others' exposure. We mentioned a few players before, they have the reach, so potentially is linking up as a federation like Football Australia, linking up the physio or the department that does educational content with the 3 best, most popular players, and do, you know, let that reach do the job, because you already got great content. Like Football Australia, I think has a pretty good injury prevention program. There's one available for the Netball Australia. There's one maybe potentially for the AFL, I'm not aware. But they're great programs, they're effective, they're simple, they can be done very quickly and easily, but not many people are aware of them, not many people do them. Now, if the captain of the Matildas does a 3 posts on Instagram with these exercises, suddenly you've got a massive reach. And that's where I think strategically we need to move forward. That's what I would,
Yeah, I think a little bit offended there, Alicia, because I had a 6,000 word review and something I need to drag it and got the message across the way. Wish I could have done it. So, I think a big problem we have is, just around the lack of numbers in female research. So I think the number's something about 6%, particularly in sports science research, where it's looked specifically at female athletes or female participants. So what we do tend to see a lot of the time is findings in male research just kind of trickled in and fed into female specific programs. And I don't think that's the answer to our problems. So for my area of research around game day sort of preparation or priming strategies, there's quite a lot that's been done in rugby and in males. And the key mechanism is suggested to be a big spike in testosterone from heavy sort of sessions, heavy resistance training sessions or high intensity sprint sessions. And then nothing had been done in females. So it was really interesting to see, at a rugby sevens tournament, that's what I'm working at the moment, the women's team out doing the priming session a couple of hours before the game. And I was really kind of questioning why or where they've kind of made that decision. And I think that's typically come from the male side of things. And with the hormonal differences we know between males and females, the question there is really whether that is something that's going to provide the same amount of benefit. I don't think it's enough just to say, no, it's not, or yes, it is. I think we need to explore that further and actually look at more research with females specifically as the population of participants, so that we can start to build a bit of a database, a bit of normative data around what that might look like for females. And I think another thing just worth pointing out is sometimes not finding a result in a study, it's not a waste of the study. So we're talking about oversharing findings or overselling findings. You know, finding something doesn't work is important as well, and that can help to change directional path for future studies. So if an intervention in female space doesn't work, we don't discount it, we acknowledge that, and then we sort of look at a few different avenues.
I do have a question, maybe more of a comment. So Katrina Fraser, University of Sydney, some of very insightful thoughts, but I wonder to what extent we need to change our research question from what the physiological differences, how this menstrual cycle affect ICLs and so on, to how much of the gender environment leads to that stage. Because essentially what happens, we tell our kids from younger ages that girls don't kick balls, therefore you don't need to go and practice the ball. That means that you don't learn how to kick the ball, how to receive the pass. You also don't get access to good coaches because the best coaches go and work with male teams, and those who didn't make it, male teams are kind of like filtered out. You'll be good enough. You don't have facilities where to practice, when to practice. You've got so many different barriers. So by the time you grow up into a player, suddenly you have that support, but the support is actually not there it should be. And that leads into my next question is, when will we professionalize sports industry as an industry? Because it's great, and I do that as well. I look at leadership, at coaches, coach education, we should teach them in this and this and this. But poor coaches work full time doing something else, and they volunteer their time with the pitch because the kids play, because they're passionate about sport. So not until someone becomes a head coach when they kind of maybe have an opportunity to do educational courses, to engage with nutritionists, to engage with sport support services generally speaking, and develop a database. But I think it's too late at that stage. So I guess what are your views on those two questions?
I agree 100%. I think your question before around resourcing and really trying to, I guess, bolster the grassroots level. We don't want just volunteer coaches or people that, you know, we get to run the fitness because it's someone's mum or dad or a parent. We really need to be able to invest in that. And if we invest at an earlier age, that's going to help that top end elite level as well by actually having some competition coming through. I think part of my role at university when I first started was placement coordinator and put students in placement roles. And I remember having a conversation with a football club, and I won't name the name of it, but they came to me looking for a student to help out with their program. And they said to me, oh, they're going to work with the women's program. I said, okay, great. So they'll work under you and learn. And he goes, no, I work with the men and they'll lead the women's program. So for them to have that mindset around putting an intern student in there that's there to learn and there to develop, to run the women's program, just shows how far away we are, and the men's program is heavily resourced. I think the same thing happens with athletes as well. You touched on it there, is really the early education around nutrition, around training, around some of these things that they can start to get right at an early age to then be able to build a solid foundation to move forward. And I think that's where another issue, probably a little bit of a pivot, but we see some programs nowadays that we have standards we want to meet from a performance standpoint, so strength, speed, things like that. A lot of the time it's just an adjustment from a men's standard target, and that comes back as well to the research question around we need a bigger database of female specific research, normative data, so that we can actually set some realistic expectations that the female athletes coming through can actually aim for.
I think the society and the way society looks at physical activity, sport, etc., is definitely an area that needs exploring, but also it's probably very slow to move forward. My impression is that there's definitely much more exposure now, thanks to events like the World Cup, for example, that can drive changes in how people look at sports. And particularly as generational change occurs, then you would have potentially a bigger drive into shifting the image of girls don't kick, football, or they don't do martial arts, or whatever the stereotype could be. Luckily, I've been brought up in a pretty open-minded environment, so I've never really personally been subjected to that. And
I was lucky enough not to see any of that, but it is definitely an issue, and it is definitely an area that, once again, needs to be moved forward. Hopefully, again, the help of advocates and the national team will be once again a great driver. That could be potentially in terms of marketing campaigns as well. I think I'm looking for solutions like federations, again, clubs could definitely lobby in a way to shift the image of, if you're a girl, you don't play soccer or you just do these other sports. I don't know. It would be interesting for me to learn from you guys and what you feel, because I do believe this is probably the hardest and the slowest moving item in this conversation. And honestly, this is all I can offer. I don't really have an answer, but I do think it's up to people to shift their image and education, like not necessarily formalized education, but education of society. And again, once I'm going to have kids, I know what kind of parents I'm going to be in terms of sport, and I appreciate not everyone might think the same, but I think slowly it will move. What we can do is definitely advocate, definitely be out and be out and about breaking this barrier, literally, because it is a barrier for women's sport.
Yeah, I just tend to agree with you completely in terms of environmental factors are massive, and the problem I think is that most of the people in the room identify that, and it's the people outside the room that probably don't and are not encouraging their little girls to, jump off the couch like their brothers are doing, or climb up the tree. And I don't know, I think as a group we all identify that, and we all see that, and we know that it's important for to treat both our sons and daughters the same and encourage them to do the same. And I guess the other issue is like you talked about, I think it'd be great if we professionalise sport, like grassroots. That would be an absolute dream. But I think one of the other issues is the training age of a lot of young girls. So in terms of the amount of time they've spent doing strength conditioning by the time they reach that elite level, and sometimes if you look at a lot of the traditionally male-dominated sports like NRL, NRL, AFL, football, and the rugby codes, I worry sometimes that they've got a bit of a top-down mentality in terms of, we're going to just get this elite league, so we look really good in media, and we're doing we're doing what the Football Association's doing. So all of a sudden throwing these athletes who might not, had basically come into the sport training once or twice a week, never doing any strength conditioning, all of a sudden they're playing these semi-professional competitions, and they're doing their training load has increased exponentially. They haven't really got that much experience doing a lot of strength conditioning stuff. All of a sudden you're throwing them into these environments where injury chances are much higher. So I think that's also something to consider. Sorry.
I think the other element to that is, as researchers, we need to do better at that, not just looking at quantitative information, but also matching it with qualitative, which goes back to like all of the amazing ACL rehab programs that we have. But if no one implements them, what's the point of having them? So we need to do better in how we evaluate and get that information out there. Sarah, absolutely last question, because I know the game's about to start.
I'll be super quick, but I just wanted to respond a bit to this stuff about the menstrual cycle. And Thea has a ton of material about it, but a lot of times coaches feel stuck, like I gotta go from 0 to have a personal conversation with individuals about their cycle, and it doesn't have to be that way. There's a ton of resources. So when I work with coaches at youth levels, I say, present these resources first to start the conversation. And I'm working on some myself that are decommercialized, but honestly, Nike, Puma, Adidas, they have some really good resources out there. So any coaches, you look those up, and there's just, 3-page, 4-page knowledge about basics of the menstrual cycle can be a really good first step.
I'll also plug the AIS Female Performance Health Initiative. They've got a lot of resources for athletes as well, if you want to pass it.
Just a question for Alicia, I think, but also for the others. Talked about the coaching ratio, male to female in all sports. So I think it's pretty universal. I think that ratio is a lot worse in some countries too. And what do you think are some of the structural barriers that contribute to that? And I don't think it's just for coaches, like if you look at physio who work at the highest level, like yourself talked about then having motherhood impact your ability to work at AIS. And I've also spoken to a physio who was working at an elite club and she had to leave the position because I think around something to do with like the pay they were offering and the amount of hours that actually go into work, even when you get paid for potentially a half-time role, you're working full-time. And with children, it's unsustainable, young children. But like what could be the impacts, or what are the kinds of things that would have to change to address some of those more structural barriers? Because I think also thinking about like the volunteer model at like the youth level, how much harder it might be for a mom to take on a role like that compared to a father. So I know those are sort of like cultural questions, but like what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, sport is yet to be, I feel, particularly as maybe both player and support staff, completely family friendly. You know, even in my example of the AIS, one of the biggest things in my mind was professional sport as I was working in that time, I was a brumbies in the rugby space. And some days I'd be needed at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday to do, you know, the DEXA or some kind of testing. And then another day I'd be needed on Wednesday or Thursday at training in the afternoon. It's like, I cannot see how daycare could work. I didn't have family support. And in my head, I'm just like, that does not fit my life or what my life will be at all. And that's just one small example. It's interesting, nutrition is a female profession predominantly, but in sport, I have been a female in a man's world my whole career. I've worn shirts that don't fit me. I have just had shirts swimming on me most of my career, to be honest. And I've been in conversations that have been really challenging. I've been, you know, even my return to work when I had my third baby, I had to go and pump and I got laughed at. I'm getting emotional. I got laughed at by one of the guy managers and I had to go to the toilet and it was just like, man, like this re-entry into work is not okay. It's been really hard. Sorry to cry. It's just, I feel like it is improving and, you know, to see Minnie now with her mum just absolutely living in the girls' environment and being such a beautiful, welcome space. It's changed a lot in such a short amount of time. And a massive thank you to everyone who has stepped up and paused and created and insisted on that change. I think there's also been times as a female where I haven't been asked. Just assume that, oh, you've got a young family, you wouldn't want that opportunity, or you wouldn't want to come, you know, like that would never be said to a father. So I think we have a long way to go. Sorry. Anyone want to add to that? So I just start talking.
I was also a big thing that's coming from the Carmen dilemma, you said as well, talking about being at work and at a conference.
She was at a conference
presenting and she's 6 months pregnant. I think that's, you know, she said she got a lot of people reach out after that, but I think that's something we need to normalise for mums or soon to be mums in the workforce. And yeah, I mean, just supporting people as they transition back, it's super important. And I think, you know, a lot of the time they are male dominated roles, but I guess particularly in the female space as well, having females involved, they bring something that we can't. So yeah, I think it's super important.
Sport is a really difficult area for anyone to work in, particularly so for women. But I think we often focus so much on how do we improve it for women. But if we just like structurally change sport, this isn't an easy task to do, but structurally change all of sport so that it doesn't have to be early mornings and late nights and constant changes of schedules and every weekend. Let everyone do share roles. Let more men take on carrying roles at home. And if you can improve the culture of all sport, it's also going to benefit women. We don't need to focus just on improving sport for women, and that's in every role of sport as well. So there's a lot to do in sport.
Yeah, and a massive credit to TG, the Matildas coach in this space, because from the very get-go of Minnie coming back, he had the experience in the US national team to know that a baby environment actually isn't a disruption, it's an add. And he came in with that narrative from the very start, like, this isn't actually going to disrupt, this isn't going to distract, this is actually going to be an addition. And even in those moments where it's a distraction, it is such a welcome distraction. Like, you've got to ease the pressure, you've got to ease that stress. And, you know, Harper walks into the meal room and the girls gravitate. We're doing singing, dancing, baby voices. No one's thinking about the game. No one's thinking about the loss or the win. It's like connection and family in the most, it sounds so cliche, but it is a really beautiful addition. And I think the more we think about, and you said, like, mums do bring a different role, they bring a different add and an empathy that you can't replicate anywhere else. And there's such a beautiful power and value to that in any team environment. So I think the more we talk about, you know what, we don't want the same. It's because it's not the same, but we do add something different. And I think in many regards, something that's really, really valuable, more valuable than the narrative gives credit for a lot of the time.
In the interest of time, I'm just going to thank all of our panel members, and if anyone is still interested in having conversations and picking their brain, feel free to do it afterwards. Thank you. Really elevated.